The road stretched out in front of them, endless and empty, flanked by vast expanses of desert. It was a warm night in the summer of 1981, and the Sanchez family was making their way through the western part of New Mexico. The windows of their aging station wagon were rolled down, letting in the dry desert air, still hot from the day's sun. The sky above them was a deep, velvety black, spattered with stars that seemed to shimmer in the quiet stillness. Luis Sanchez sat behind the wheel, his eyes focused on the lonely highway. His wife, Maria, was beside him, her head resting against the window as she dozed off. In the back seat, their two children, 12-year-old Javier and 8-year-old Sofia, were in a rare moment of silence, Sofia asleep and Javier engrossed in his comic book. They had been on the road for hours, driving from their small town in Arizona to visit family in Albuquerque. It was the kind of night that felt timeless, the world outside the car surreal in its emptiness. The desert was beautiful, but it also had an unnerving quality, especially at night. The mountains in the distance were mere shadows, and the landscape felt vast and unforgiving. Luis glanced at the gas gauge and frowned. They were running low, lower than he had anticipated. He hadn't seen a sign for a gas station in miles, and his memory told him they were in a stretch of highway where there wouldn't be one for some time. "We might need to pull over soon," he muttered to himself, hoping Maria would wake up so he wouldn't feel so alone with his thoughts. But she remained still, lost in her dreams, as the car hummed along the blacktop. It started suddenly at first, a flicker in the corner of his eye. Luis thought it was a trick of the light, just the moon reflecting off the sand, but when he looked more closely, he saw the flicker again. This time, it was unmistakable. Strange lights, shimmering and dancing, appeared on the horizon, far ahead of them. They hovered in the air, moving in erratic patterns that Luis couldn't explain. He blinked and rubbed his eyes. "What the hell?" Maria stirred beside him. "What is it? Do you see that?" Luis nodded toward the horizon, where the lights continued to move. Maria squinted at the lights, her expression becoming tense. "Maybe it's a plane? Or something from the military? You know they do all kinds of tests out here in the desert." Luis wasn't convinced. The lights moved too strangely, too deliberately, and they seemed closer now, almost as if they were coming toward them. He could feel the tension rising in his chest. Javier looked up from his comic book, noticing the sudden shift in his parents' mood. "What's going on?" Luis didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the road as the lights drew nearer. They were now impossibly bright, casting long shadows over the desert, and Luis felt his heart quicken. They were the kind of lights that didn't seem natural, too bright, too white, and moving in ways that defied logic. The station wagon began to vibrate as the lights closed in. Luis could hear something now, a low, humming sound that seemed to pulse in the air, making his skin crawl. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end. "Dad?" Javier's voice was small, scared. "What is that?" Suddenly, there was movement on the side of the road. At first, Luis thought it was just more shadows, tricks of the light playing on his tired mind, but then he saw them clearly. Dark shapes, low to the ground, moving alongside the car. They were running, pacing, the car, keeping up with the station wagon as it barreled down the highway. Luis's blood ran cold. These weren't normal animals. They were large, too large, and moved with an unnatural grace, their shapes barely discernible in the dim light. He caught glimpses of them as they darted in and out of the shadows, their eyes glinting with an eerie, predatory intelligence. What are those things?" Maria's voice trembled as she gripped Luis's arm. "I don't know," he muttered, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. He pressed harder on the gas, but the shapes kept pace, their dark forms moving effortlessly along the side of the road. Sofia woke up, groggy and confused. "What's happening? Why is everyone yelling?" "Nothing, baby, just stay calm," Maria said, though her voice betrayed her fear. The lights were now directly above the car, casting an intense white glow that made it hard for Luis to see the road. The humming sound was louder, almost deafening, and the dark figures seemed to multiply, surrounding the car on all sides. Luis's heart raced as panic set in. They couldn't outrun whatever this was. He wasn't even sure they were still on the same road anymore. The desert all around them seemed different, alien, as if they'd crossed into another place entirely. Then, out of nowhere, a gas station appeared on the side of the road, its neon sign flickering weakly in the night. The old, rusted pumps stood like sentinels, and the building itself looked abandoned, its windows dark and cracked. Luis slammed on the brakes, pulling the car into the station. The lights overhead blinked out instantly, and the strange shapes that had been pacing them vanished into the night. For a moment, there was only silence, broken only by the ticking of the engine and the labored breathing of everyone in the car. Where did that come from? Maria asked, staring at the dilapidated station in disbelief. Luis shook his head. I don't know, but we need gas. I don't want to run out of fuel out here. Javier was glued to the window, staring out at the darkness, as if expecting the strange creatures to return at any moment. Luis stepped out of the car and approached the pump. The air around the station felt wrong, too still, too quiet. There was no wind, no sound of crickets or the hum of electricity. Just dead silence. The pump was old, the kind with a manual lever, but as he reached for it, he saw something that made his stomach drop. The hose was severed, cut clean, hanging limply from the pump. No gas, he muttered, his voice hollow. As he turned to head back to the car, something caught his eye. A figure stood at the entrance of the station store, barely visible in the shadows. It was a man, tall and gaunt, his eyes reflecting the faint light of the stars. Hey! Luis called out. Do you work here? The man didn't respond. He just stood there, staring, unmoving. Luis felt a chill creep up his spine. There was something deeply unsettling about the man, something that made every instinct in his body scream to get back in the car and leave. But before he could move, the man stepped forward, his face now fully illuminated by the light of the car's headlights. His skin was pale, too pale, and his eyes were black, bottomless pits that seemed to suck in the light around them. Luis stumbled back, his heart racing. He turned and ran to the car, slamming the door shut behind him. Luis, what's wrong? Maria asked, panic in her voice. We're leaving. Now. He gunned the engine, and the car peeled out of the gas station, tires kicking up dust as they sped back onto the highway. The neon sign flickered once more before disappearing into the darkness behind them. For miles, no one spoke. The strange lights were gone, the creatures nowhere to be seen, but the fear lingered, thick and oppressive. What was that place? Javier finally asked, his voice small. I don't know, Luis said, his voice trembling. But it wasn't supposed to be there. They drove in silence for the rest of the night, the desert around them quiet and still, but the feeling of being watched never left. It clung to them like a shadow, a reminder that something out there had seen them, and it wasn't finished yet.